I'm thinking back to when I was in rabbinical school. We used to go to my friend David's house every week to watch Lost. There was a group of us, all HUC students, maybe one or two friends we had picked up along the way. And this was back before you could stream television on Netflix, and it possibly was even before DVRs were standard. And we had all these rules about how no one could talk during the show, and we were very strict about it. Anyway, it was the regular night of the week that we socialized. We had dinner together and we stayed and talked and drank and avoided our homework. I have lots of good memories of that time, but I also have this specific, powerful memory about a conversation that I had with one person in the group. And in our conversation, he said something about how the ship was sinking. And this friend, he ended up leaving HUC that year or maybe the year after. He found a better fit for himself at the conservative rabbinical school in LA, but this was before he had jumped ship. The ship is sinking, is what he said. Now, I'm diehard Reform, born and raised. My dad's a Reform rabbi. I spent most of my youth being the poster child for NIFTY, the Reform youth movement, for the movement's summer camps. In the congregational world, I went from Hebrew school to youth group board. I was president, and then I was on regional board. I was a song leader. In the camping world, I went from camper to counselor to song leader to director of education. And of course, there I was at HUC. So I'd spent really most of my life living and breathing and bleeding Reform Judaism year round. So when he said, the ship is sinking, it stung. That was my ship he was talking about, which is why I said, with all the gusto and passion and idealism and naivete of a 20-something rabbinical student who has not yet been tried and tested by the rabbinate or by grief or by the economic crash of 2008 or by 2020 for that matter. That is why I said to him, well, then I guess I'm gonna have to go down with the ship because I'm not about to abandon them. This is when they need leadership the most, I said. And aren't we the ones who are supposed to be righting the ship? Isn't that what we're doing here in rabbinical school? I don't remember how the rest of the conversation went, how it started, how it ended, just that one exchange. But that part of the conversation stayed with me. It haunted me. Was the ship sinking? Was I committing myself to a lost cause? Was it too late? Were all the brilliant students in my class going to jump ship and join other movements or start other movements? Was congregational Judaism dying? Was everything I loved about Judaism about to be written into a chapter of history? It kept me awake for many nights, for many years. And while I never once considered jumping ship, there were definitely low points when I wondered if I should have. And also moments of exceptional joy and affirmation when I've been so proud to say that I didn't. I've seen our movement start to correct a lot of things I was concerned about back then. It's not perfect. It still struggles. Sometimes I wonder if it will eventually sink. But I don't worry about whether or not I'm going down with the ship. I teach, and I build, and I lead, and I double down on what I believe in, and it's good. And I didn't think about that conversation for a long time. But lately, it's been coming back to me, gnawing at the edges of my consciousness, floating in and out of dreams. The ship is sinking. And this time, the ship is America, which is not my country. But it's a country I spent a formative decade in, a country filled with people I love and memories I cherish, a country where the brand of Judaism I've spent my whole life living and loving and leading is rooted. And yet it's not my ship. But I can't stop thinking about the choices that all of my loved ones in America are making right now. I have begged family members to leave before the election in case there's violence afterward. And I know that not everyone can leave, and that not everyone has the choice or the privilege to choose. And I know that if everyone who shares my values flees for the border, the ship will sink. I want the people I love to be safe. But I know that for most of them, America is their ship, and they need to stay and fight for it. And they need to right it, and they need to turn it around. And I'm afraid for them, and I believe in them, and I pray that in another decade, I'll look back, and this will be one more story, one more disaster averted. I cannot imagine what it feels like to be in America right now. I can only say that we on distant shores are holding our breath, watching, waiting, hoping. What happens next will change the world one way or another. As I'm recording this, I don't know what the world will look like by the time you are listening to it. But I know that this too shall pass.
Wow. Thank you.
Love you.
I love you.
Should we sing a song? Clear the air.
Helpless.
Help. And her eyes, she is.
Okay. So I'm thinking about how a few months ago, my 4-year-old son came home from preschool singing a song that I hadn't heard for years. It's one of those call and repeat songs, so all of you at home can feel free to sing along with me. We're going on a bear hunt. We're going to catch a big one. What a beautiful day. We're not scared. Uh-oh, grass. Long, wavy grass. We can't go over it. We can't go under it. We've got to go through it. The song continues as the children in the story meet one mildly frightening roadblock after another. A deep, cold river, thick, oozy mud, a dark, creepy cave, and they even find the bear. And these are definitely spooky for kids and maybe even some adults. And we're reminded throughout, we're not scared. And plus, maybe most importantly, we can't go over it. We can't go under it. We gotta go through it. It's an American folk song for children that was adapted into a book in 1989 by Michael Rosen. And yet, it really hit me right in my kishkis when my son sang it to me this summer while my mother was declining in hospice. The words rang so true and as deep as that deep, cold river in the song. It's a song presumably about an adventure, but what a safe way to learn that there are moments in our lives which might be unexpected and maybe even a little scary. And try as we might want to get around them, we sure ain't avoiding them. We have to go through them. Can we imagine a more profound message to start learning as a toddler? As adults, this is still a really tough message to fully embrace. This past year has forced all of us, every single one of us, to wrestle with loss, frustration, sadness, loneliness, and isolation. We have stayed away from close relatives and friends for long periods of time. And we have all been isolated in our homes for various times, some even longer due to being high risk. And we've learned new behaviors and stopped old ones. Ever since this pandemic began, our world has changed in so many ways. And I really hope that we've all allowed ourselves the time and the space to feel sad or angry about it. And I'm sure there have been so many moments of joy sprinkled throughout, but have you let yourself cry or mourn the losses that you've experienced or feel angry about events you've missed out on? We all feel loss because of the very real fear of illness. We never would have guessed that there were to be times when going grocery shopping would feel like an actual life or death choice. And due to these concerns, there have been so many heartbreaking consequences. Some of us have actually experienced the cruelty of having a loved one die alone in a hospital since no one was allowed by their side. And personally, as my mother lay dying of pancreatic cancer in the hospital, my 3 siblings and I We're told that only one of us could visit her for a brief 20 minutes every other day. And thank goodness we were counseled by a kind social worker to bring her home to die in peace. And if your family experienced a life cycle event, one of joy or sorrow, the added pressure of whether to hold it in person or how many people to include was often gut-wrenching, as you rightly struggled to keep everyone safe. Funerals and shivas, which should be times filled with the comfort of friends and family, were more often quiet and empty and lonely. Happy events we may have been planning for a long time may have had to be canceled or postponed until a time when it would be safe to, God willing, have a large group of guests to celebrate with. And I don't mean to just list all the ways that we're feeling depressed or frustrated. Instead, my intention is just to give all of us permission to feel our feelings. Many of us push our negative feelings away for so long, we don't even realize we have them anymore. As Dr. Henry Maudsley, a 19th century British psychiatrist, said, "A sorrow that has no vent in tears makes other organs weep." So it's critical that we give ourselves spaces and times to give our souls time to feel their various feelings. And there's no shame in admitting to depression or anxiety or brokenness at this time or at any time for that matter. And those of us who struggle with depression or anxiety in a good year may find our illnesses exacerbated by current events. And others who've never struggled with mental illness may be surprised to find themselves feeling symptoms of depression. In our culture, we aren't taught how to be sad very well. We're impatient with grief, and grief is a good word for what so many of us are feeling, for all the different kinds of losses since the pandemic began. A book entitled Death and Grief, A Guide for Clergy, states, shortly after a funeral, for instance, mourners are expected to be back to normal. Grief is something to be overcome rather than experienced. The result of these kinds of messages is to encourage the repression of the griever's thoughts and feelings. Refusing to allow tears, suffering in silence, and being strong are all thought to be admirable behaviors. It's now been 3 months since my mom died. And when I think about it, I don't really have a good role model for how to mourn. It's been really important to me that when people ask me how I'm doing, that I fight cultural pressure to say I'm fine. And instead, I try to be really honest. I don't say that I'm fine, and instead, I try to be honest and say I'm not doing well. I'm actually quite sad, and that it's okay to admit that. It's healthy to allow the sadness out. It's not weak. It's not dysfunctional. It's not going to destroy us. Rather, it strengthens us for later experiences. I wonder what we'd accomplish or experience if we all took all that energy that we use to push away sadness or anger and instead used it elsewhere. The sweet irony, by the way, of the Bear Hunt song is that during this time of COVID-19, some families throughout America have actually started putting teddy bears in their front windows so that other families can go on socially distant real-life teddy bear hunts, just so that this time can be a little less scary for their little ones. Because we can't go over it and we can't go under it. We just have to go through it. And you know what? We have no choice but to go through it together. So I hope we will go through it and we'll do it together.
That was beautiful, Mars. I know I've said this to you before, but not in the presence of our listeners. I'm really sorry for your loss. And it really sucks. And I love you.
Thank you. I love you too.
So basically, we're not thinking about anything serious or heavy or life altering. No, it's been like a really chill year, actually.
Totally.
No big deal.
Yeah. It was a beach summer.
I just want everyone to know that you're drinking out of a giant black mug that says Big Daddy on it.